Good afternoon. We'll call this October 23rd meeting of the Planning Environment Committee to order, and I'll look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing none. Councillor Hopkins just had to grab something. She'll be with us momentarily. Are there any items on the consent agenda that colleagues would like pulled? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a motion. Councillor Helmer?
Yeah, I just see, item number 5, there's a request for delegation status, and I wonder if we wanted to deal with that separately rather than all together. So I guess I want to pull 5.
Pull 5? Sure. So we'll take a motion on the balance. Councillor Helmer, and then Hopkins.
Thank you. Just a brief comment on item number 9, which is the building division report. I was glad to see that the residential construction in particular from January to August is even outpacing last year, which was a record-setting year. So I think it's important that we recognize that there's really a lot of construction activity happening, especially in the residential sector. And that I know we've discussed it many times, usually when this report comes up at Planning Committee, that it's really pushing the limits, frankly, of the staff in terms of keeping up with all this activity. So it's a good problem to have, I suppose, but I want to recognize it does pose some challenges.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins. Okay, with no other speakers, we'll call the question on the balance.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and item number 5.
Excuse me, Chair. I was in favor as well, voting manually.
Oh,
just
beg
logging
pardon.
in.
Sorry, I didn't see you here. And Councillor Helmer, did you want to speak on 5?
I wanted to pull 5 so we could deal with the delegation request, either to grant it or not, but I didn't want it to be just passed without considering the delegation request.
Looking for speakers? Mayor Brown?
I'm not sure if a delegation is necessary at this time. We all received a communication, I think it was on Friday. I think that just went to members of the Planning Committee, not to the entire council. You know, the person looking for delegation status indicated general support for the staff recommendation and this going ahead. And so I think from my perspective, message received. So if there's no other, unless there's a different opinion, I'd not move delegation status at this time.
Moved by Mayor Brown, seconded by Councillor Turner. You're not logged in. So we have a manual movement of the motion.
I'll make the motion.
There we go.
Just for the
Moved and seconded. And any speakers on that? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and back to the staff report. Any speakers? Okay, seeing none, we can take a motion.
I'm sorry, I already did it.
You already did it.
I'm sorry.
It was all tucked in there?
Yes.
Okay, beg pardon. Everything was all in one vote. Pardon me. Okay, so we're through the consent items. We can move on to item number 10, a public participation meeting for an application by William Brown for a property located at 4100 Glanworth Drive. It's a request for demolition. We'll take a motion to open the PPM. Colleagues, do you require a presentation on this? No? Okay. So beg pardon? No. So at this time, we won't need a presentation. We'll just go straight to the public participation meeting. Okay, moved and seconded, and we're voting. Oh, Councillor Hopkins and Manuel Brown.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and looking for speakers from the gallery, if you'd like to speak on the demolition request at 4100 Glanworth Drive, right on up to the microphone.
Janet Hunton, 253 Huron Street. This cottage is of considerable historical interest, as you will see in your staff report. Early people settling in Westminster and traceable people. But it's also important in being one of the very few 5-bay Ontario cottages within the city. I know 5-bay meaning central door and 2 windows each side, to a total of 5. I know of only 3 in the whole city, and I did help with the initial inventory and the Westminster Township inventory, so I have seen most of what's there. So I urge that cottage not be demolished. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking for further speakers on this? Any further speakers on the demolition request? Okay, seeing none, we can take a motion to close the PPM. Okay, moved and seconded. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, looking for speakers, colleagues. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was kind of disappointed that we don't have Latch here to actually present their report from this past session. This subject property seems somewhat interesting and intriguing in its aspects. So the report goes through and talks a lot about the aspects that make it somewhat unique. Is it the Fleming brickwork? As our delegation just spoke, knowing of very few examples of a cottage of this type in London. My understanding is that the stewardship committee and the general body of Latch weren't necessarily in agreement, which is why I kind of wanted to have that discussion a little bit more with Latch prior to making a decision on this. This seems to be one of those ones of interest. So I guess through you, Madam Chair, to Dr. Dent, what is it specifically that that's lacking in this that makes it warrant demolition and not preservation?
Okay, thank you, through the chair. I guess 2 issues. One is that there's been extensive interventions to the brickwork over the years that have resulted in really a loss of integrity of this attribute, which is one of the primary architectural attributes. And over the years, it's been severely impacted the historical authenticity of this property through the extensive interventions of the brickwork really are irreparably diminish its cultural heritage, value, and interest. Secondly, the historical record, which as part of 906 evaluation criteria is does not exhibit direct associations to the subject property. It's more indirect through contextualizing the original man, the family man, through genealogical history, but it's kind of indirect. The property owner is the grandson or the great-grandson of what would be of interest, historical interest. It would have been the great-grandfather's relationship to land speculation and the War of 1812, and it's not a direct association to the property and the property owner, so it's indirect. And the 906 evaluation stipulates direct association, historical association. So it's those 2 portions of the criteria that are missing, I guess, or to warrant retention of the property.
Any further speakers? Seeing none, I'll take a motion, one way or the other. Councillor Turner?
I would like to defer consideration of this until such time as we have a Latch delegation to speak to it as well.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hopkins? Okay. Just one moment, we'll get that up. Any speakers on deferral? Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. We've been doing this quite frequently lately, and I understand we have an advisory committee that gives us advice on this, but we also have staff, and I'm concerned that we seem to be very, very frequently recently dismissing the expert opinion that we're getting from our staff. So I'm not going to support deferral at this time. I would have supported the staff recommendation, and that's what I'll do at council as well when this goes forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, you know, sometimes when I read recommendations and I'm not sure, and I need a little bit more information, I think it's important that we as a committee get that information. Part of it is missing from Latch. I don't feel like we're the experts here. I'd like to hear from them, so would be very pleased to support a referral back.
Brown?
Thank you, Chair. Really just a question through you to staff. Why hasn't this gone through Latch? Why aren't we hearing from them tonight?
It has been.
I'm sorry.
Clarification, yeah.
I'm sorry, why, let me rephrase that. Is there a reason why Latch isn't here tonight to speak to this?
The committee secretary and perhaps Mr. Yanchula can make comment on that.
Sure.
So the chair of Latch declined to be present at today's meeting, and as far as we know, didn't have a substitute to send. I'd like to point out, though, for the benefit of your knowledge, to look at the bottom of page 155 in your agenda to make sure that whatever requests or whatever decision you make it by November 7th, or it will be deemed to be demolished under the terms of the Heritage Act. We could speak further to the heritage integrity of the building if that helps your discussion.
Thanks, Chair. I'm inclined to not support the motion that's on the floor. I think that we've heard really clearly from staff, both in the report and also just through the comments that were made, that this is an appropriate direction to go. And I also recognize that there was an opportunity for us to hear more, and we're not this evening. So I think that also based on the timing outlined on page 155, that I won't support this, and maybe we'll deal with it at council as well.
So just for everyone's decision making, we would require a special meeting between here and the next council meeting if this were to go forward. Councillor Turner, you have the floor.
Fair enough. Thank you, Madam Chair. Recognizing the timing considerations, then I would, I can withdraw my deferral, but I would urge my colleagues to vote against the recommendation. Just to speak to Councillor Cassidy's point about our decisions with respect to heritage, I would say that slides on both sides of the scale. That when recommendation for retention has been made by staff, this council has chosen not to take that recommendation. And those ones I find even more concerning than those where demolition is not seen as an issue. So in this circumstance, I see enough merit in the application and enough question to say at this point that designation continue and that we don't remove that and I think if you take a look at the building itself, I think it's got some rather significant features, such as the Flemish brickwork. Notwithstanding the repairs that have been done to a couple of the sides of it, especially when you take a look at the construction, the manner in construction, and especially that tree alley that leads up to the cottage itself. I haven't seen many examples of this, as the speaker had noted, in London at all. When I saw the picture of this, I was hard pressed to come up with any other examples. So I would encourage my colleagues to defeat the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Councillor Turner's comments, duly noted. He's right. We don't always agree to what the staff recommendation is, either for or against demolition. It's just been my perception that recently we seem to be going against the staff recommendation when it comes to heritage. And we have a very qualified, two now very qualified heritage planners with a great deal of expertise and education. And I just want to make sure, through you, Madam Chair, that staff knows that we do respect the qualifications of our staff. And it is up to us in the end to make the final decision. But I would move the staff recommendation at this time.
Okay, so he's withdrawn the deferral, pardon me. And we've got a motion on the floor from Councillor Cassidy looking for a seconder at this time. I don't see a seconder. Oh, I was looking for a paw in the air, to be honest. There you go. Okay, just going to be a moment before they can get the staff recommendation back on the floor. Any further speakers on the staff recommendation at this time? Councillor Helmer?
Well, I listened to what Councillor Turner was saying. I'm not persuaded that the building needs to be designated. I do appreciate the submission from the public around the 5 Bay. I think that's an important point, but I don't think that on its own is enough. I agree with our staff and with Latch, and although Latch is not here to speak to us, they did recommend that it be removed. So I'm fine with that.
No further speakers at this time? Okay, we can call the question on the staff recommendation.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-2.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. On to item number 11, a public participation meeting for an application by Farhi Holdings. Properties located at 200 Albert Street, 192 through 196 Central Avenue, and 193, 197 Central Avenue. You can take a motion to open the public participation meeting. Okay, moved and seconded. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, Ms. Debert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This application relates to 3 existing surface commercial parking lots located just west of Richmond Street. 2 of them front on Central Avenue on either side of the street, and the other one fronts on Albert Street. These sites have been used for temporary surface commercial parking lots for periods of time ranging between 12 and 25 years at this point in time. The properties underwent site plan approval for commercial parking lots in 2005, 2009, and 2012 respectively, going from the top of the slide to the bottom of the slide. And the temporary use which had been applied to the property expired on June 24th, 2017, after the application for renewal had been submitted to the planning department. So just up front, as I have mentioned, the ask is to extend the temporary commercial parking lots for an additional 3 years, and our recommendation is for approval. The context for the planning review included review of the provincial policy statement, which talks about development of complete communities and efficient use of land. The 1989 official plan, which sets out a number of criteria for the review of temporary uses, and they're listed in summary on the slide there. The London plan, which essentially has the same criteria as the 1989 plan, except for an additional one which talks about the possible frustration of the viability of the intended long-term use of the lands, which is a bit of a variation on potential long-term use from the 89 plan. We also looked at our move forward, London's downtown plan. It identifies 200 Albert Street and 193 to 197 Central Avenue as underutilized sites. And it also identifies 200 Albert Street as a redevelopment opportunity site. The downtown parking strategy was kind of interesting for this particular application. These properties lie just north of the northerly boundary of the study area. So they're not technically inside the study area for the downtown parking strategy. But because they are in really close proximity to the study area, and because of the role of these particular parking lots in supporting the downtown and Richmond Row, we took into account the parking strategy for this application. Our transportation division advised us through the process that the preliminary recommendation of the parking strategy is to consider a gradual transition away from temporary surface parking lots as the downtown develops. Our basic rationale for our recommendation, first of all, with respect to the downtown parking strategy, I've noted what the anticipated recommendation is going to be when it does come forward in the near future. The parking strategy, as I alluded to the last time for 221 Queens, when we were here talking about an extension of a temporary parking lot, is that it will allow for an informed evaluation of the continued need for surface commercial parking as we develop more structured parking in the downtown itself. The application meets the temporary use criteria of both the 1989 plan and the London plan. In the short term, the continuation of the existing lots supports existing offices and commercial uses, both in the downtown and along Richmond Row. In the long term, the accompanying existing zoning that rides with these properties allows for a broad range of future development opportunities. So the opportunities are there, it's just up to somebody to take advantage of those. And there will be no further impact on potential redevelopment in the future. So in summary, we feel it's appropriate at this time to extend the temporary parking lots for an additional 3 years, noting that in 3 years' time, the parking strategy, I suspect, will be in place at that point, and we would have a different set of information to evaluate in reviewing such an application. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you both. Any technical questions before we go to members of the public? Councillor Turner, then Mayor, then Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've been through this a couple times. A question that just kind of occurred to me through you. With the 3-year extensions, it seems that they end up kind of being short windows. So if we were to give somebody notice that use was no longer to be permitted, it would be in the moment. So right now, for example, we could say, all right, no longer will we grant that 3-year temporary parking use of that site. And so now, as of today, you can no longer use it for that purpose. So now you have to kind of scramble and figure out what you're going to do with that. In 3 years' time from now, we'll be in the same position where maybe today we kind of say, all right, this is one more time, we'll let that happen. And then we're on that day again, and we say, okay, tomorrow you can no longer use the parking lot for that purpose. Is there a way to sunset this? recognizing rapid transit corridors, recognizing the desire to make use of underutilized sites. Is there anything in our tool belt that could say, in 6 years' time, there will be no more extensions, or in 3 years' time, there will be no more extensions? Somehow to give the property owner notice that that there should be a transition away from surface parking usages.
Mr. Fleming?
Well, Madam Chair, the normal type of zoning, or the typical type of zoning, doesn't have a sunset. A temporary zone does have a sunset. So by its very nature, you're only saying that you're allowing for this for up to 3 years. You can't go beyond 3 years. But you also can't tie the hands of future councils by saying that when this runs out, there won't be any future extensions. That's something that somebody could always apply for, and the council of the day would have to have that opportunity to review the application and make their decision accordingly. But if you were to be approving this, you would essentially be saying, we're allowing this for up to 3 years, and there's no assurance of any future approvals. Certainly, council can make a comment around the expectations, and beyond that, other than a policy which doesn't allow for the extension of temporary uses longer term or discourages those within a certain area, there really isn't anything that council could do to prevent future council from approving a further extension.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fleming, I think that's exactly, I guess, the question at hand. Is there a policy consideration? At which point, is that within our realm as a municipal council to say that there's a total number of renewals that would be allowed at maximum, or a specific amount of time? So if we just have 3-year temporary renewals that continue every 3 years, just as a matter of right, then they're really not temporary. They're just normalizing the use at that. If we were to say, okay, you can do 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, but at, you know, 9-year or the 12-year mark, that's the limit of the number of extensions that you can have. Is that something within a municipal council's powers, or is that provincially determined?
The official plan currently does include policies that provide criteria for the evaluation of temporary zones. So one of those criteria, you could include criteria that relate to the long-term intention of the lands, for example, as part of what you're evaluating, or if there's a certain geographic area that you would like to discourage the extension of temporary zones, something along those lines is possible. I think that a policy, this is my opinion, a policy that indicates you can't have more than 2 extensions or 3 extensions probably is not a defensible planning policy. I think that it should be, if council wants to go in a certain direction, it should be characterized in a different way, one that is more directly related to the goals of the council, and something that is geographically based and aligned with some other goals, for example, regeneration of downtown area, or trying to prevent, as is already in the London plan, the frustration of the redevelopment of the lands. So I don't think there's a formulaic way of saying no more than 2 or no more than 3 extensions. I think that you need to have policies in place that allow you to evaluate future extensions.
Okay, Mayor Brown, Van Holsten, and Hopkins.
Well, thank you, Chair. I didn't intend to be on the speaker's list, but I'll take the advantage. I'll take the opportunity. That's okay. This is a really, I mean, Mr. Fleming used the term frustrating, and this is a really frustrating situation, I think, for all of us. We hear on a regular basis that, you know, there's not land that's available and ready to go to build the kind of high-rise apartment buildings that we want to see in our downtown, that we've envisioned for our downtown, and that we know is the key ingredient to success for a more vibrant downtown. For many, many years, we could hear Judy Bryant speak about it. about feet on the street. That's the ingredient to make a vibrant downtown, and the way you get feet in the street after 5 o'clock is to have people living in the downtown area. And so it's, for me, this is a very difficult situation because it's balancing out the short-term recommendation, which is to provide another three-year exemption, which then does provide parking that's required for businesses that are functioning in the area. But part of the frustration is that 3 years from now, it's difficult to predict what that next council will do, and whether we just see this happening time and time again. And so I'm going to listen to the debate today, but I do want to be on record to say that it's frustrating, that we know that we need to have adequate parking in our downtown. We've been waiting some time for the parking strategy. I'm looking forward to finally seeing that document so we can make more informed and educated decisions on these matters. But the only way that we're going to see the kind of growth that we want to see in our downtown is that we get the best use and most appropriate use out of lands, and these lands aren't, for the long term, appropriately used as parking lots. So I'm going to continue to listen to the debate, Chair, and make a decision as we go.
We'll just go through the rest of the technical questions. Councillor Van Holst, and then Hopkins, then Cassidy.
Thank you very much. And my question through you, Madam Chair, to the staff is, do we have any idea how often these parking lots are full? Can we get a sense of how well they're used?
I wonder if the applicant has a chance to speak after we go through the technical questions. Perhaps that's more appropriate for them to answer. If you have any other questions, please go ahead.
No, I had some comments in support of Councillor Turner, but I can save those.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hopkins, then Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and these are just technical questions. So I do have a couple questions here, just following up, I think, on what Councillor Van Holst was asking. Do we have a parking authority here with the City of London? Who sort of regulates the parking lots and what's going on?
Through the chair, we do not have a parking authority. We have a property services structure that report up through myself, and we control city-owned lots and city right-of-ways.
So not on private properties then?
Through the chair, we do also regulate on private property with agreements with the property owners. We have multiple agreements to regulate parking on private property as well.
I assume these properties aren't regulated at all.
I believe these ones are regulated typically through or controlled through Impark, a private. Yeah. But we also work with Impark as well on many of the lots.
Thank you. And I guess my other question through you, Madam Chair, is to staff. You know, I find this a little frustrating too, because we've got between 14 and 25 years of parking on these properties. So to me, they're not temporary uses. And what, if any, conditions do we apply when we grant these extensions, or do we? So conditions in maintaining the parking lot, putting up a bench or a tree, or are there any conditions that are applied when we give extensions?
Madam Chair, depending on the situation, sometimes we do require them to go through site plan. If site plan had previously been done under a previous extension, then we wouldn't necessarily compel them to go through site plan again. But that's generally the biggest condition that we put on applicants for temporary surface parking lots.
So there's no regulation when it comes to maintaining that parking lot and making it safe, I guess, and maintained, the surface and the lighting and the lot itself. It's really up to the owner. Am I right?
Madam Chair, if there's a site plan in place, there's certain elements that could be controlled and things like lighting. However, there isn't currently in effect conditional zoning. The regulations are not in place in the Planning Act to allow for conditions going along with zoning. So something like safety or some of those other things that aren't included in the site plan process would not be something that is covered through the zoning. And one other quick thing is relating to the question of utilization. I just will point out that the parking study will deal with parking lot utilization, but in the downtown area, and this is just outside the downtown, but you will have some information in front of you in the future as that comes forward.
And when will that be? Do we know when the parking study is coming forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, soon we are targeting the first week of early December to bring the parking strategy to the Planning Committee.
One more question, go ahead.
And if I may, one more, not sure, I hope it's a technical question, but I read in the report that we have to gradually transition, and I'm not exactly sure how we do that. Where's the information that sort of gives us the, I guess like the tools on when we make these decisions here at committee by giving extensions? I'm also thinking, how do we gradually transition these lots? And I don't see those tools that are available to us. So I don't know if you can answer that question, but I sure would like to see some.
Well, I think that's going to be a big part of the discussion coming forward with the parking strategy, but certainly understanding the utilization rates is part of that. Furthermore, seeing what the impact of rapid transit is another part of that. If the city were to construct a parking structure of some sort, that's another factor. All of these things relate to how important these surface parking lots are, these temporary surface parking lots are to servicing existing businesses in the downtown, and thus the ability to pull them away. And certainly another one is if we're able to work with the developer, for example, through a privately initiated project in order for them to provide some publicly accessible parking, which meets our parking standards, that could also allow some capacity so that we could then, in that gradual way, not be approving the extension of temporary zones in certain areas.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what this committee and this council have been doing for the last 3 years is, rather than granting 3-year extensions, I believe we've been granting, for the most part, 1-year extensions. Is that correct? And have we granted since December 1st, 2014, have we granted only 1-year extensions, or have we done some 3 years as well?
Madam Chair, this is certainly a topic that this council has discussed thoroughly, and probably more so than in the past. This council is really having a good look at these. However, there's been a mix, though, of approvals. I know the very last one that we brought here, I believe, was on Queens Ave, and that was a 3-year extension as well.
Have we granted any 1-year extension? Any that we've limited to just 1 year?
Madam Chair, I'd rather have a look rather than just guess, but I'd rather have a look than just guess.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what might have happened is that we went that route at committee, but it got changed at council. That's what I think I have been reminded of. Okay, those were my questions for now.
Great. Any further questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, is the applicant here and would they like to speak? Okay, Ms. Dornbush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Michelle Dornbush. I'm with Selenka Priamo. We're the planning firm acting on behalf of the current owner of the 3 various parcels subject to the application before you. We've had an opportunity to review the staff report. We don't have any concerns with respect to the recommendation of staff. Now, just hearing some of your technical questions, I'd just like to provide some additional information. When we're dealing with these sorts of applications, obviously, it's in everyone's best interest, including our clients, for the lands to develop. That's the intent of purchasing these lands. They are vacant lands proximate to the downtown, so that is the long-term and overall intent for the parcels. Unfortunately, with parcels like this in an area proximate to the downtown, it's essentially market that dictates when these lands develop. And we've recently been seeing that. And the difficulty that we're looking at with the development of these lands in particular is that, as you've heard from staff, they are just outside of the downtown area. So these lands are not afforded the same incentives that lands within the downtown area are. So as those lands in the downtown continue to develop, we will see that there will be more of a demand outside of that primary area. Now, I know the new London plan does define these lands as being within the downtown area, but currently, like it was mentioned, it's just north of that. So we have to look, the reality is that these are conditions that we can't change. It will help with the changes in the official plan. And maybe we'll look at, I'm not sure if there's a review of the incentives moving forward, if they relate to the new downtown area limits defined by the London plan. But these are things that we have to take into consideration. And essentially, it's slow progression as lands inside the downtown. And as we see those happen, then that will eventually come out. And we are continuing to see that happen. There have been several recent high-rise development applications. Several of them have been on existing commercial parking lots in the downtown area. So that will continue to happen. These lands, as they currently sit today, they do provide the necessary parking for existing commercial uses on the Richmond Road corridor. They also serve a number of office uses. If we are to lose this parking, and again, because we're outside of the downtown area, there is not the same amount of parking that's currently available. It's a little bit farther from those in the downtown area. So these lots are essential to the long-term viability of the existing uses in the Richmond Road corridor. So until we can come up with a development plan that makes sense for these lands, that one implements the intent of the official planning and zoning bylaw, but also is able to incorporate additional parking for those existing uses, the reality is we have to maintain those, or we're going to have hardships for those existing uses on Richmond Road that don't have access to other parking areas. And as well, we do find that during the day, the lots are fairly full because of the office uses and the retail uses. And again, on weekends when there are activities in Victoria Park, and there are a number of them in the summer, these lots are absolutely full for those coming into the downtown. So again, we will continue to monitor. Obviously, the downtown parking report that's coming forward is critical to the long-term intent for these lands and the overall downtown area. But until that happens, it's a bit premature to restrict an extension to 1 year, given the fact that any development approvals, those alone take a year. And we're still waiting on the report from staff, which isn't set to come till December. So we're still more than a year away from even any development plans happening here, just in terms of the timeframes for future development. So at this time, we would ask the committee to support the staff recommendation. And again, we are continuing to work with our clients with respect to development plans on a regular basis. And as the market dictates and as changes continue to happen in the downtown area, we will continue to monitor this. And over the long term, absolutely, these lands will develop. We just don't have a definitive plan at this time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Any technical questions at this time? All set? Okay, thank you, Ms. Dornbush. Moving on to members of the public. If you'd like to speak on this application, please come up to a microphone.
Hello. Janet has jury-rigged this for me. Good evening. My name is Sandra Miller. I live at 32 Upper Avenue, London, Ontario, obviously. So in your agenda package, you will have read, hopefully, a letter from the Architectural Conservancy Ontario, the London Region branch. We submitted a letter, shall we say, encouraging the continued development of downtown as opposed to the continued parking lot sustaining program. Here we are again talking about yet another 3-year extension of a quote-unquote temporary parking lot. We just heard the numbers, 12 to up to 25 years, which I think we all would agree is not really becoming temporary anymore. I don't think anyone in this room is talking about eliminating parking. I'm certainly not. ACO is not. We're talking about a higher and better use of that land. We know that as our downtown becomes more and more commercially viable, as well as the residential infill that's been happening, it's been a real boom, especially in high rises. Every one of those new high rises has built or will be building incorporated parking within its building structure for its own residents, but also extra parking for the surrounding neighborhood, commercial, retail, downtown visitors, et cetera. So there is extra parking built into these new buildings that are coming into the downtown. We also know that surface parking lots are an incredibly inefficient use of those lots, as are empty lots. Nobody wants to see these sitting empty. We want to see development. Everyone wants to see growth and prosperity in our city. And infill on surface parking lots and empty lots is obviously the preferred option for ACO. We've seen tremendous pressure on existing heritage buildings as well as non-heritage buildings. Any building that gets demolished to build a high-rise, you want it to be really worthwhile. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of very unfortunate demolitions and neglect going on that have resulted in long-term parking lots in past years and in recent years. This council and you are sitting here around the horseshoe have repeatedly talked about your frustration, and you've expressed that tonight, and have said that you won't be encouraging or allowing continued parking lot renewals. So here is a really golden opportunity to take that step, to send a strong message to landowners, parking lot developers, and land speculators, for lack of a better term, in our city that temporary parking lots is not how we want to see our city developed. We want to see sustainable infill development, and we want it done on shovel-ready lots such as surface parking lots and empty lots. So before next year's election, here's a great opportunity to stand up to the promises that you've made to all of the citizens of London, and we look forward to seeing no further continued ongoing renewal of these endless parking lots. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for further speakers? And one more time, looking for further speakers?
Good afternoon. Mohammed Musa, 155 Thornton Ave. I've heard the word frustrating used a few times here this afternoon. What's frustrating to me is that nobody's seen that these lots actually serve a purpose. People drive. You've got to understand people drive. If you want them to come downtown, they need places to park, whether it be business owners, whether it be employees, whether it be shoppers. What's frustrating to me is all you have to do is go to the city website and see that the city owns no less than 12 surface parking lots. Put out an RFP, sell it to developers, because you guys are trying to say to this property owner that that's what it needs to do. The city owns surface parking lots that you want to eliminate them, put out our RFPs in order to sell them. This is, respectfully, I disagree with the ACO. I mean, in terms of the letter that was in here, I respectfully disagree in the sense that there are a lot of developers that have come forward wanting to develop land. How many of those are on the books right now? How many have pulled permits? So do not blame the property owners that are trying to get extensions, useful extensions to things that support the downtown. Do not blame them for older buildings being torn down and sites sitting undeveloped. Last count, there are 11 applications. How many, my question is, how many have actually pulled permits to build? Two other points I want to make is that recently this committee and council had approved a downtown building with absolutely no parking. I have to reiterate, people drive, people need their vehicles at times. Not everybody, but many people do. Parking lot, sorry, there was one other point I wanted to make and I've kind of lost it. Developments. Oh, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Further speakers? Okay, one more time. Any further speakers on this? Okay. Seeing none, we'll take a motion to close the PPM.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, looking for speakers? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this one becomes complicated. I mean, I think it eventually becomes complicated. I think right now, I think the staff recommendation is appropriate. The complication comes when we've built our move forward plan. We've approved that. We did that 2 years ago. How do we implement that? And these opportunities arise with some frequency now. And we take a look as a matter of course. All right, we have a renewal. We have 3 renewals up right now. More opportunities to implement the policy decisions that were made as a result of passing our move forward. The implementation of that becomes difficult when our tool is only a 3-year renewal or not. And not having some place in between. The challenge is trying to telegraph out to temporary permit holders for parking that at some point that doesn't continue. But that ends up landing it outside of our policy window. And our term ends in a year's time. And so then we don't have any influence over the decisions of our successors and so on, so forth. Right? So the vision of ending these as of right doesn't rest with us anymore, other than the fact that we made the policy that might continue on and be interpreted by the next council or the next council after that. In this circumstance, what we see is kind of 2 factors that aren't lined up and ready to go yet. One is the parking strategy and the second is rapid transit. Both of those would inform whether these renewals are appropriate or not. If the parking strategy was there and we had a sense of where the parking was, and Mr. Musa's right, people have to park downtown someplace, and these parking lots do play a role. However, the way that we've been exercising bonusing provisions and the way that the parking strategy will move forward will identify the number of parking spots required. How are we going to accommodate them? Do we accommodate those within our new buildings? The 3 parking sites themselves could easily accommodate the number of surface parking spots within a building as it's built as well. So all that said and told, we're not ready to execute on the development of those sites. It is unfortunate that a lot of those sites are sequestered right now and not able to be developed because they're not ready by the owners to be released into the development pool. With respect to the question of these being development potential sites, well, the next item on this is about a high-density tower outside of the downtown area. And so I would discount that as an argument because it is a candidate site for building. And if you look all the way up Richmond, right up to Oxford Street, you see multi-story buildings in the 12 to 15-story neighborhood, especially around John Street there. So in this circumstance, I would say, I wish I could just say, yeah, we'll grant 1 or 2 more extensions at most. We can't, that's not in our power. And I hate not having the ability to influence the next decision at the renewal phase. Unfortunately, we have to deal with what's in front of us now. We have to deal with it pragmatically and appropriately. And in the context of what's ready to go, those 2 elements, the parking strategy and rapid transit, aren't in place. Those being in place or coming to material fruition, that's the time that we start to say, all right, now we put a little bit of pressure on these things. We've got a lot of levers that we can pull, and this is one of them. The incentives for building, there's kind of carrot stick approaches that that we can use. Market forces on their own, I'm not one who subscribes to just letting them to a laissez-faire approach to development in our city. I think there's a strong place for a regulatory environment and a policy environment, and there's a strong place for the market too. They will have to work hand in hand. I think the policy that we've put in place with our move forward is appropriate. I'm really curious about how we start to execute that. And that's the disconnect for me. So in this circumstance, I can vote in favor of a 3-year extension. If I'm in this chair 3 years from now, it's not likely I would. So I also think it's fair to give the landowners notice that this is the amount of time that elapses that you have left on it. I find it difficult for us to be in a position and say, tomorrow, you can no longer use it for that purpose. In this case, it would be next week after council passes this on Tuesday night. So those are some of my comments. I really think there's a way that, or a need for us to be able to communicate when these end to the landowners so that they know and they can make plans and appropriate arrangements for them to transition surface parking lots into something a little more in keeping with the policy directions of this council.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Van Holst. I'm looking for other speakers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Although I do like the song Big Yellow Taxi, I'm not a person who's ever been disappointed by encountering a parking lot. However, the questions that Councillor Turner raises are important ones. One solution that seems to come to me is if our problem, as he states it, is that we're not able to sunset a parking lot in our own term. What we could do, however, is provide an extension long enough to put this at the beginning of the next councillor's term so they would be in a position to say 2 years from now, that's when it ends. They could set it in within their term. So it seems to me like that's something that would be possible if you desired to do that. But I also, like Councillor Hopkins, would like to see the tools we have for transitioning, because we need the parking lot. The parking needs to be there. We just need to find out what needs to be next, and it's probably that's the more important element, is what happens next, because we'll have to do something before we can just eliminate the parking lot.
Thank you. Mayor Brown?
I spent the weekend in Tobermory with family and was explaining to my kids about timelines and geology. And sometimes things move a little bit slower than we want them to. I think the really important message from the debate tonight is that not right now should not be interpreted as not ever. We have set a vision for our community and how it's going to grow over the course of the next 10 and 20 years. The London Plan is a document that looks out over a 20-year horizon. The rapid transit plans will take 10 years to implement fully. And as Councillor Turner pointed out, we don't have the information today that we would require to make a decision like this today. But I think all indications should be interpreted as pointing towards the days of these extensions are numbered, the days of these exemptions are numbered. And this is the direction that we're going in the community. It's not going to happen overnight. And I'll support the staff recommendation this time around. And as we get closer and closer to seeing our vision come to fruition, the likelihood of applications like this being approved, I think, are less and less.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Park.
Thank you very much. Few days ago, I was reminded of a situation that the last council faced with this very applicant on a different property, where at the time in this very room, the applicant had said that they had plans for creating a parking structure on a property. And I would hope that on these particular parcels, perhaps an application similar to that would be the next go forward there. It's been well articulated by members of the public and also my colleagues here on council, surface parking, and I'm sure Councillor Helmer and I bang this drum repeatedly since we got here on council, that surface parking is the most inefficient use of land. Stacking cars on top of cars, now there's an efficient use of land and a really good income generator for a property owner. I'm going to talk a little bit about the frustration I have with the lack of a parking strategy to date. And 2 years ago, we asked for that, and it's put us in a really difficult position as a council where we're having to make these decisions over and over again without a real plan going forward. In a very respectful tone, since the beginning of our term, we've got a rapid transit plan. Unfortunately, we don't have a parking strategy, so I'm going to end my comments there about the frustration there, but pitter patter, let's go. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for other speakers. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I do have a question to the chair, to our staff. We're talking a lot about the parking lot use, and I just wonder if someone could point out how many parking spots we're talking about in these lots.
I did count them up on the aerial photography through you, Madam Chair. It's approximately 200. Michelle may have more detailed numbers.
Okay, so I do have a couple of comments. We have dealt, this is the third, I think, temporary use extension for surface parking lots. The other one was 221 Queens, and the one before that was 195 Dundas Street. 195 Dundas Street was the very large service parking lot. At committee, we did support 1 year, and then when we got to council, it ended up being 2 years. So we have done one that was less than 3, and it was 195 Dundas. 221 Queens was 3 years, and here we go again with another one for 3 years. I didn't support any of those extensions of temporary use for surface parking because I do not think that the land should be used for surface parking. I understand where our staff are coming from. I know that the parking strategy is outstanding and will be coming forward sometime in the future. It has been outstanding and coming forward sometime in the future for quite some time. We do, however, as I have pointed out in previous discussions on this issue, we have the 2015 Downtown Parking Strategy Update, which is a public document that we've all had and I've read. And it says, for example, that there are 15,436 parking spots in various kinds of configurations in the downtown area. And the overall peak utilization for those parking spots is around 71%. 85% utilization is where you start to have problems getting parking. Now, there's some parts of the downtown area that are getting to that level. You have lots that are being used at 85% utilization. You got other ones that are not even close. And we have charts in that report from 2015 that show different kinds of parking and what the utilization rates are like on weekdays and on weekends. And I, for example, just looked at some aerial photography. We've got the aerial photography that's in our actual package, page 100 and, let's just see. I'm not sure exactly what page it is, but you can see the one that shows the zoning, and there's an aerial photo there. And look at how many parking spots are actually being used by cars in those lots. So you can see there's an adjacent lot over by Campus Creative across the street. It's jammed full of cars. The other lots are, I don't know, 10% full, 15% full, just eyeballing it. I went back on the city map and checked 6 years of aerial photography. These are obviously taken at different times of day and it's pretty much empty all the time. Like, it's not a very well-utilized parking lot. And certainly we don't have any information to the contrary. It's one of these ones that is very short-term in use, right? People pop in, they go to a restaurant or something that's on Richmond Street, they do take care of stuff and they leave. And I think that in general, I think it's fair to characterize it as a low utilization series of parking lots. If we want the lands to transition to new uses, we have to stop renewing the temporary use surface parking. We passed a general policy in our move forward that we would do that. We would discourage the extension of temporary use. That is the indication to everybody who has lands that are temporarily zoned for surface parking that we're going to start phasing them out. So I don't think it should be a surprise to anyone. We passed that years ago, and I think it was plenty of notice about what is going to happen in the long term with these lands. I am very concerned that, you know, as these things turn up for discussion and renewal, we're just approving all of them. And we're never saying, nope, this can't be used for a parking lot anymore. This one, I would say in comparison to 221 Queens and 195 Dundas, is even less important in terms of, you know, its actual function that it's performing right now. 195 Dundas, I think would have more cars in it. 221 certainly is much higher, the utilization is much higher. So I don't know why we're so concerned about the potential of 200 parking spots leaving the supply. There are 50, this is just downtown. This area is actually outside of downtown, so that the parking supply in that area would be even more. But we're talking about what, like maybe 1%, 1.5% of the parking? And it's the low utilization part of that parking. So I think, colleagues, we have to be very careful about it. I know that the easiest thing to do is just continue the status quo and just let it keep being used for parking. And certainly it does perform some functions in terms of making it more convenient for people to park closer to where they're trying to go. But what will happen is if the parking supply is not available here, people will just park elsewhere. And so those lots that are 75% utilization, they'll inch up to around 80%, and people will find parking. The parking spots people want, generally speaking, are the ones closest to where they're going. And once those things are not available, the ones that are located there now, they will find the one that's the next closest one, and they'll park there. And they might have to walk an extra 75 meters or 100 meters, but they will adapt. I don't think, you know, we deal with these things one after another. We have to have an overall strategy. I think waiting around until the parking strategy comes forward is not the right thing to do. From what I know of the parking situation already, from the reports we already have, we need to start phasing out surface parking lots. So I'm going to vote against this one, like I have with the other two. I hope my colleagues will join me.
Councillor Hopkins, then Turner.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's comments, and I am really not sure where to go with this. On the one hand, we're not given the information that we need with the strategy, the parking strategy. I hear Councillor Helmer saying, we've asked for it, we don't have it, we need to have it. I think we also have to have a better understanding about the BRT and how that's all going to work. I also heard from the applicant having, not having a definitive plan yet, but coming in the near future. And I hear what Councillor Turner says about the importance of having some a time frame for the developer to be allowed to do his business and to be fair. And I'm just wondering if there, and the other part, Councillor Van Holst spoke about, what I'm afraid of, we set the motion with this council, and then the next council, we're not sure where that's going to go. So to have some kind of coordination, just wondering if there's an appetite here on this committee to have an extension of 2 years. So I'd like to bring that forward for debate.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to add to the conversation here, but I guess it's committee, so we can do committee work at committee. I'm wondering, I guess, perhaps out loud, if there's a way that we phase this in, and one way is to not grant the full 3 years. The other way is to not grant all 3. And I would take a look and say that I would probably look to take the oldest one offline first. But, and that's 192, 196, and that was granted in 1992. So it's been 25 years. But I'm just trying to come up with a creative option on this, and perhaps it's not appropriate, but I would look for comments and thoughts from my colleagues.
Okay, any retort to that? Councillor Hopkins?
Well, I guess this is the beginning of the transition that we keep on saying we're going to do. And I'm in favor of 25 years is a long time, not granting that and extending the other 2 lots for a 2-year period.
Further speakers? Mayor Brown?
An interesting proposition at committee, Councillor. Certainly would send a clear signal and direction. I'm wondering if we can talk about the number of spots in that lot compared to the overall amount.
I wonder if for the context of the conversation, if we could have the map back up on the screen.
And perhaps, my apologies to kind of throw this into the crowd. Perhaps it's not for us to make that decision right now. Perhaps it's for us to refer back and say, we'll approve 2. Work with the applicant and staff to figure out what the most appropriate one to come offline is. So I would make that motion. I would make the motion to say that that council would entertain the renewal of 2 lots and to refer to staff to work with the applicant to determine which one would be the candidate for non-renewal.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Hopkins? We'll just take a moment to get that up. Any speakers on that while the motion's coming forward? Councillor Helmer, then Cassidy?
Yeah, I understand where Councillor Turner is coming from. I don't think you should renew the zoning for any of them. Our staff have already recommended that you renew the zoning for all of them. I don't know what we're doing other than taking a longer period of time to make the decision. I don't really understand the rationale for 2 out of 3 can be renewed and not the 3rd. Doesn't seem to be based on any kind of like numbers or reasoning. It's just like, we want to do less and this is less, so let's do that. I think you should just deny the temporary use zoning for all 3.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I kind of don't remember putting my hand up, but that's okay. I'm glad Councillor Helmer spoke and put all those stats out there, because it's really important, because it's also about perception. And there's a perception out there that every single parking spot in and around the downtown area is a commodity that is in high demand and low supply. And obviously that's not the case. And, you know, it takes one person to notice the aerial photos that accompany the report and not knowing a time of day that it could be, but obviously it's daytime or we wouldn't be able to see it all. And you see the emptiness and so I like where committee's going. I hear what Councillor Helmer is saying about just deny it outright, all 3 of them. But I do believe in giving notice. I do believe in trying to allow the applicant to make plans for the future and not to be caught completely off guard with this. I'll see what motion comes up And I'm looking forward to hearing more comments. I'm still looking at the picture, so I'll move that. Thank you.
Further speakers? Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say I'm pleased to see some creative problem solving happening here. I think that we've got sort of a more gentle way here with 2 out of 3, and certainly by allowing the proponent to decide that that is also a fair way to go. I still would like to, although here we seem to see a fairly empty parking spot where the ones along the Williams near there were very full, and other places you can see where they're quite full. It would still be nice to know how much of these are used, how often, and then that could give you a sense of, give you a sense of how much constriction in the available places there. And although I'll say, although it may be an inefficient use of land, it's certainly a convenient use of land for those people who are driving. But I don't have any further comments.
Councillor Cassidy, I saw your hand for real that time.
That was real that time. I have a question for staff. If we're talking about a property tax rate on these lots, what rate are these lots being taxed at? I'm not looking for percentages. I'm saying, is there a parking lot property tax rate, or would these be vacant land rates, or does anybody know that?
Madam Chair, we just did a quick look around the room. I don't think there's anyone present with the expertise to answer that question at the moment.
I think I had been told, so hopefully we can have that information for council, but I believe I've been told in the past that these are, because they're a temporary zone and it's not actually a parking lot for real, that what I've been told in the past is that they're taxed at the rate of a vacant lot. So this seems to me, we are giving incentive, as other councillors have said, we're giving incentive for this to continue in perpetuity because they're getting taxed at a very low tax rate, and yet they get to earn a lot of revenue off of these parking lots if they can get people to park there, I guess. So I'm concerned about that, and I would like that clarified in time for council to know what the property tax rate is on these spots.
Okay, so would Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you, and thanks for Councillor Cassidy for bringing that up. And I'd also like to know versus a permanent parking place, because that's something else we could do is just give a spot, instead of renewing them year after year temporarily, is just zone it for permanent parking. And then if the applicant decides to go with one of the other zoning options and develop it, they could do it at that time, but that might bring in a greater tax revenue. I'd be interested in seeing those numbers anyway.
All right, so we've got the motion on the floor with more information coming back before council. Is there any more debate on the motion at hand? Okay, seeing none, we can call the question after we moved it and those things.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-2.
Thank you, colleagues. On to agenda item number 12, a public participation meeting for application by Drew Lowe Holdings, Inc. for properties at 661 through 667 Talbot Street. Take a motion to open the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Mr. Cork.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, the subject site's located at 661, 667 Talbot Street. The subject site's highlighted in red on your screen. It's the former site of the old Locust Mountain Estate. We're located in the North Talbot neighborhood, and the site backs the Thames River corridor. In 2008, the site was cleared, removing the remainder of the estate that was on or had a fire on the property. Here's the context of the site within the surrounding area. So you can see to the north there's apartment uses that get higher and some industrial type uses, and then the surrounding residential and corridor behind the site. So a little brief history on the subject site. There was previous applications made back in 2013. There was a site plan application for a 14-story, 158-unit apartment building, as well as an application for a minor variance requesting an increase in height from the permitted 10 stories to 14 stories with reductions in setbacks and parking. The proposed development included 4-bedroom dwelling units. However, during the site plan process, the near campus neighborhood policies came into effect, and this reduced the maximum number of bedrooms to 3 per unit. Due to this loss in bedrooms, the applicant withdrew their applications and moved forward with the rezoning last year. So here's what the site plan submission looked like. This would have been approved if it were not for the near campus neighborhoods coming into effect. We have 14 stories right along Talbot Street, and it's an L-shaped building. And there's 14 stories going back along the north section of the property. So the revised application that came in was to permit apartment building with 16 stories in height with 236 units. This is to make up for the loss of the 1 bedroom in all those units. Again, same shape as the previous building. We have 16 stories now along Talbot Street and along the north portion of the property. Through communication with the applicant, we expressed some concerns in that previous design and the massing and the materials, and also expressed some of heritage concerns and the public concerns. So they revised the drawing a bit. It's a much nicer elevations provided. However, the massing is still quite large along Talbot Street in the north portion and doesn't respond to the surrounding community. So we had further consultation with the applicant and discussions about the proposed form. And they revised their drawing one more time for us, and it's quite an extreme difference. This resulted in a revised application that we recirculated to the community. Again, the height still stays at 16 stories and the unit count stays the same. However, we get a building that has a 3-story section along Talbot Street, then it steps back to an additional 7 stories. 16 stories of height will be provided along the rear of the site and the north portion abutting existing apartments. There will be 133 underground parking spaces and 38 surface parking spaces. In order to achieve the desired density and height, the applicant has applied for a bonus zone in return for the underground parking and enhanced design features being provided. So here's a rendering of the final design that we received. As you can see, it's quite different. All the massing is pushed to the back corners where it has less impact on the surrounding properties. And we have a 3-story section along the front to respond to the abutting heritage properties and residential houses across the street. So through the circulation, some public concern was raised, and first we'd like to note that the notice of public meeting did not make it out to the North Talbot Community Association. This was just left off in error, and we apologize for the mistake. Staff was aware, however, that the main contact does live in the circulation radius, so our mailouts do go to the individual who is the main contact for the neighborhood association. Through the process, staff responded to all relevant questions of the association and the individual. Comments and reviewed the file material thoroughly with them. Staff wants to make council aware that the statutory notification requirements have been fulfilled for the application. Some of the other main concerns obviously are the environmental and species at risk that could be on the site. Obviously there's heavy vegetation on the rear slope. People were concerned about the removal of trees and potential impacts on species at risk. Just to be clear, the rear portion of the site is already zoned open space 4, protecting these lands from development and tree removal. In fact, we'll see through the application that we got to increase that open space zone and take it as land dedication through the site plan process will be happening. The proposed development will occur in an area outside of the stable slope within an approved development area. This development limit was established through the site plan process with consultation with staff and the Upper Thames Conservation Authority. During the site plan approval process in 2013, we accepted a subject land status report and had no concerns about the potential development impacts on the site. Through the upcoming site plan process, a biologist will be required to survey the site to ensure that no potential individual species at risk are within the development limit prior to work commencing, and the areas identified by Biologic for renaturalization are required to have a restoration plan approved by our ecologist and shall also include a construction of snake herbinacula within the area. Also, robust heavy-duty silt fencing is to be established prior to construction starting to exclude any wildlife from entering the site. So this is just a quick image to show the lands that are already protected through the zoning. And as I mentioned, this pink line in the middle or the rear of the property will actually be moving to the east, increasing that area protected through zoning. A couple other concerns that were raised, pedestrian traffic. There was concern about the potential closure of the sidewalk during the construction period and lack of available street crossings on Talbot Street. The only signalized intersections are all the way at Oxford Street and Central, so if an individual is walking down, they'd have to backtrack a long way to get this signalized intersection. The applicant will be required to identify and provide for alternative movement solutions through their traffic management plan as part of site plan approval. Another major concern, and this was a concern of staff and heritage staff, is obviously the built form and design. However, the revised design has addressed many of these previous concerns about size, scale, and massing and the impacts on abutting lands. No design concerns were expressed upon recirculation of the revised application. Only one comment was received upon the revised application. All the height has been moved to more appropriate locations, limiting shadow impacts and creating a more appropriate form and scale along the Talbot Street interface. So in terms of the official plan on the site, it's already designated as high-density residential designation, and the proposal is in keeping with the relevant policies of the official plan and provincial policy statement. The proposed form takes into account the surrounding land uses and responds to the existing height scales and setbacks of the surrounding homes and apartments. The development maintains a similar character along Talbot Street and responds to the abutting heritage homes to the south through the use of brick material and a 3-story built form before it steps back to provide additional height. Adequate municipal services exist in the area to accommodate the increases in density. And Talbot Street is a primary collector road with capacity to accommodate any potential increases in traffic and not affect the surrounding community. A separate left turn lane will be required into the north portion of the site, and this is where the majority of cars will enter and exit and ensure traffic flow continues on Talbot Street. The site's close proximity to transit, public open space, convenient shopping facilities, and service facilities also provide justification to permit an increase in density on the site. Because the site is vacant, it does meet the definition of residential intensification. Therefore, the applicant had to provide us with a character and compatibility report as outlined in the official plan. As already touched on, through several iterations of the building design, the applicant was able to reshape the original massing of the building from a 16-story L-shaped building into a U-shaped building of varying heights in order to better fit within the existing context. In addition to the multiple height changes and step backs, the variety of materials and colors further break up the massing of the building and help it to be more compatible within the community. Staff are satisfied that the proposed development is now maintaining the character of the area. The subject site is also located within the near campus neighborhood. The area provides a policy context to ensure compatible development at appropriate locations and intensities. The policies outline land use planning and urban design goals to help achieve the vision of the near campus policies. The proposed apartment building accomplishes many of these goals as the development provides an appropriate form of intensification and will not undermine the long-term vision of the near campus neighborhoods. The subject site is intended for high-density residential uses and is already considered a preferred location. The site is also in close proximity to transit connections that could link the development to Western and Fanshawe College campuses, and the urban design qualities provided also achieve the vision of near campus neighborhood as the proposal will enhance the streetscape along Talbot Street and complement the adjacent lands, contributing to the functional and aesthetic quality of the neighborhood. So as mentioned, they were required to apply for a bonus zone. The current zoning permits a density of 250 units per hectare and a maximum height of 30 meters or 10 stories. To exceed these limits and achieve the desired 403 units per hectare and 16 stories, the applicant was required to make this rezoning application. Through the planning application review process of the bonus zone, a development design has been achieved which supports the city's urban design principles. The bonus zone will be specific as it is intended to facilitate the development and design which will permit the U-shaped building that we previously saw. The bonus zone will directly be related to the enhanced urban design details described in staff's report and recommendation. So just a technicality, referring back to the movement of the zone line. So through the process, that development limit was established. The red line is that development limit and will be the new future zone line. The blue line is the original zone line, and those lands in between will be changed from the existing residential zone to an open space 4 zone to protect those lands, and that will also be included in the lands dedicated to the city through site plan. And the London Plan, so the London Plan recognizes lands that were previously identified for high-density residential uses. The subject site is one of those areas that is considered a remnant high-density residential use. The remnant high-density lands are subject to specific policies through the London Plan in order to implement future uses. These lands would be restricted to a maximum height of 12 stories under the London Plan, and the recommended density is not applicable as the London Plan does not use densities to regulate development. Staff feel the recommended 16 stories is appropriate given that the height is specifically directed to the rear north portion of the site. The applicant was able to achieve a high level of design and create a compatible form of development within the community through this bonus zone. But however, recognizing the 16 stories of height does require an amendment to the London Plan through the creation of a special area policy to permit the requested maximum height of 16 stories. So to ensure that in the future, we don't receive 16 stories along Talbot Street where we worked very hard to remove it, special area policy will be directly tied to a bonus zone to ensure a specific form of development is achieved. Questions?
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I have one question about the OS4. Why not an OS5?
Through you, Madam Chair. It was an OS4 because the corridor behind there is all zoned OS4, so it's just to be in keeping with the entire corridor.
Any other technical questions, Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through you, just with respect to the UTRCA circulation from August 25th, 2016 that came through today, I had recognized that that was 2016. So have all the concerns that were raised in this memo been addressed and to the satisfaction of the Upper Thames Conservation Authority? Thank you.
Any other questions at this time? Seeing none, would the applicant like to speak?
Honorable Mayor, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Environment Committee, and city staff. My name is George Bekas, Manager of Land Development for Drula Holdings and Planner. I'm the agent for the application for Drula Holdings to amend the zoning bylaw number Z1 relating to the property located at 661 and 667 Talbot Street. I'd like to take first off the moment to thank city staff for all their hard work. We worked together for a number of years on this application, and we finally have come forward with addressing a number of issues to provide an enhanced design standard that would fit well within the surrounding neighborhood. So I won't get into too much detail, but as you just previously heard from Mike Corby, the planner on the file, the purpose of this zone change is to permit the development of a 16-story, 236-unit apartment building. 2 levels of underground parking, totaling 171 parking spaces, 38 of those being visitor surface parking, along with an additional 9 registered visitor spaces within the P1 level of underground parking, making the required visitor parking a total of 47 spaces. The rezoning of the subject site seeks an increase in height and density in return for a form of development that is sensitive to the surrounding context. Therefore, the recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement 2014. The recommended amendment is also consistent with the City of London official plan policies and identified as a remnant land parcel within the London Plan. In addition, the amendment facilitates the redevelopment of an underutilized site and encourages an appropriate form of intensification. The proposed development makes good use of the existing municipal infrastructure that promotes cost-effective development to minimize land consumption and servicing costs. It's within walking distance to both public transit and the downtown area businesses, close to one of the city's major public open spaces, the Thames Valley Corridor. The development in front of you ensures the building form, massing, and design all fits well within the surrounding area. On behalf of Julo Holdings, we support staff's recommendation to the Planning Environment Committee and look forward to receiving your approvals in order to proceed to council for final approval. In addition, there was an added agenda for this item 12. And again, Julo Holdings supports the added agenda for the revised bylaw for the bonus zoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any technical questions of the applicant at this time? Okay, seeing none, we can go to members of the public. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to make comment on this application, please come to a microphone.
My name's Anna Maria. I live at 133 John Street. I just want to clarify a couple things. The Upper Thames River, this is outside their jurisdiction. So if you read their comments in the file, that's all they say, it's outside their jurisdiction. This development is outside their jurisdiction. Also, I submitted a petition, almost 300 signatures, and they had their own comments attached to those signatures. I faxed it over through the summer, and I was told that councilors are notified of the petition, but they don't have to look at it. And I submitted formally with my comments for this meeting, and I was told that it wasn't part of the public agenda, so people's comments are not being shown. And I want to get clarification whether committee members have seen the petition and read the comments.
So at this time, we won't be in a back and forth. This is your opportunity to make comment on the application.
Okay, well, it's important for me to understand if you've seen the petition and read the comments.
Again, this is your time to make your comments on the application.
Okay, so you can't answer that question? No. Oh, okay. Well, that's part of my time to talk, because I'd like to get clarification. So the other thing too is I also most people that are concerned about this development put their comments in writing, and I don't feel some of them were quite lengthy, and I don't feel the synopsis reflects their concerns. And again, I'd like to be assured that their comments were read because they took the time to put them in writing, and so did I. So I don't want to use my time to read everything I've already put in writing. I just want to be assured that they were read. And I'm also acting on behalf of somebody else who gave me their comments to read tonight. This comes from Heather Chapman. She commented previously, but again, did not receive a public notice. I fully support your Anna Maria Velasquez's letter recommending about the Julo development at 661, 667 Talbot Street, especially these points. An environmental impact study on using the green space slope behind this address is crucial to proper modern urban planning. A mixture of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments should be included in the building permit approval process, including some geared to income apartments, as this is reflective of the surrounding community. In my opinion, this developer, Julo, can wait a little longer to start this building project. It is a shared opinion of many in the City of London. Okay, so that Julo already has been patient enough to let a heritage property deteriorate to the point where it had been demolished, thereby making the property available to be developed to suit its purposes. We call it demolition by neglect strategy. That's Heather Chapman, Unit 3, 152 Albert Street, London, Ontario. And I can hand that in for the public record.
Looking for further speakers, please.
My name is Pat Cullimore. I live at the corner of Central and St. George, 156 Central. And I guess I'm disappointed that I'm not considered to be part of the neighborhood. So that's beyond your 150-meter sort of area that you would inform people of of developments like what's going on Talbot Street. I have lived at that residence for over 30 years, and I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of money into my home. So I very much consider that part of my neighborhood. I think that my opinion is that I think it's ironic that if you look at the logo for the City of London, it shows a tree. And we're going to be, you look at the aerials of that lot, and we're going to be losing an awful lot of mature trees. One of the other things too that I think that there's a precedent for is I attended a committee, planning committee meeting for development at 167 John Street. And one of the things, there were two things that came up was the committee granted the developer permission for their variance. They were going to put a triplex up, but they actually put a limit on the number of residents. The maximum they could have had was 3 units, 3 bedrooms per unit. They could have had 9. They granted them a maximum of 7. So there is a precedent for having less than the absolute maximum density. And if you think that lots that have been vacant for decades, we're going from 0 density to over 700 density, you think that's not going to have an impact on our neighborhood, I think you'd be wrong. Apparently, there's been some sort of a traffic study, but you're going to be including over 100 vehicles to that one small location. Like, I think you need to drive on Talbot Street anytime, at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, because it's backed up almost to downtown because it's only 2-lane highway or a 2-lane roadway. One of the other things too that came up at the committee meeting for John Street was the fact that the intention for that particular residence was for students, as my understanding is this is for students. So and my point is that students do not always make the best neighbors. And that was, I believe, part of the point in having allowing units to have or restricting units to less than 3 bedrooms per unit. There's no doubt that, I think that for this to be a student residence is discriminatory because it rules out other people renting apartments. Single working individuals, elderly people. If this is an equal opportunity development, there would be 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, and there are not. I guess that. The other thing too is that with student housing, one of the points that Anna Maria had made in one of her correspondences was these are not people who live here. They probably are going to go back to wherever they came from. They're not going to become permanent residents of London and actually contribute to the future. And the other thing too is when they're absent, which is like 5 or 6 months in the summertime, other places are more vulnerable to crime. And that has happened to me. The home that's next to mine is a rental unit, and my house was robbed because that place was left vacant for a 4-month period. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking for further speakers on this?
Hello, Sandra Miller, once again, 32 Upper Avenue.
Just a little closer to the microphone, that'd be great.
I gotta figure out how to turn. Somebody is seriously fiddled. Okay, there we go. Wouldn't want you to miss a word. So I have several concerns about this particular, I'm speaking as an individual, I'm not speaking on behalf of ACO or any other organization. I have 3 areas of concern about this particular proposal, one of which is zoning, one is design, and one is the historic stone wall that is the remnant still on Talbot Street. So regarding the zoning, it's my understanding that the lots are currently zoned for 10 stories, 30 meters. The original application was for 14 stories and included, I believe, an application for a minor variance. 4 stories being a minor variance is, I suppose, either a technicality or a matter of interpretation. And now we're up to 16 stories. So as we see in the overview here, conveniently for my illustration, the one at 699 Talbot is 10 stories, 695 Talbot is 7 stories, and 693 Talbot is 4 stories. So as we move in towards the North Talbot residential area, there is a very nice step-down graduated height of buildings. Obviously, these are older buildings that have been around for several decades. I don't know if they were planned that way, but it's a very nice transition into what is predominantly a low-rise, single-family or duplex residential neighborhood. Also, a reminder that this is on the short list of a soon-to-be proposed heritage conservation district. We've started exploring that topic. I believe that council has been looking into whether or not that's going to be one of the next ones to study. It's also obviously a neighborhood that's under tremendous pressure already for infill development. Now, this lot has been empty, as we know, for decades and is theoretically appropriate for infill development. The buildings to the south of these lots are all 2.5 story homes, several heritage designated properties, award-winning heritage designated properties. So suddenly into the middle of this, we're throwing a proposed 16-story building, even though it's zoned for 10 stories. I think perhaps the neighborhood association residents would consider a 10-story development, assuming that it fit into the context of the neighborhood streetscape. I was reading through the staff report, as well as obviously there's been much discussion online and in the media about the design of the building. I was surprised over the past weekend when I was reading the staff report to discover there was an in-between design that, to my personal opinion, was actually very attractive. The first one was quite bland. The most recent one, and I don't use this word lightly, as you know, you've heard me speak of design and architecture frequently, is remarkably ugly. And I rarely, if ever, use that term because it is such a subjective term, along with beautiful. But I have to say it was quite jaw-dropping. So then we get into the design and the bonusing issues. So whether or not this building could be built at 10 stories, 14, or 16, the staff recommendation is to allow for 16, and the bonusing seems to be completely based on the design, which I find quite stunning, that it's going to be sensitive to the surrounding context. It will provide extra green space. It's an exceptional building design, on and on and on. I read these comments. And I'm just flabbergasted because to me, this is a stolid, hulking, monolithic design, completely out of context to its surrounding streetscape and its neighborhood. It's a result of unfortunate checklist designed by committee, checking off, does it address heritage issues? Does it address this, step back, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, we've ended up with a cobbled together creature that's neither elegant or graceful unto its own as a standalone building, nor does it complement or adequately fit into the surrounding streetscape or proposed heritage conservation district. So it's really shocking to me that this would get bonusing based on exceptional design, because if this is what London is going towards in terms of exceptional design, I have serious concerns for what our city is going to look like, the downtown and the surrounding communities. So I would definitely say go back to version 2, because it was a very elegant looking building, and perhaps massage some of the height restrictions. You've got a winner there. Number 3, I would just put to landfill right away. My final comment is about the historic stone wall. There seems to have been sort of a variety of opinions about it. We know that it's not, or at least we believe it's not original to the Locust Mount house itself. Nonetheless, it is estimated to be about 100 years old, obviously handcrafted of fine stone. It's a neighborhood landmark. It has, unfortunately, the final remnant of that fine home that was destroyed arguably by neglect and arson and or neighborhood fires, and then ultimately demolished. So I would urge you to encourage the developer, regardless of what gets built there, to retain this historic stone wall, incorporate it into the final design. Don't replicate it, don't take it apart and try and create some tribute to it or a commemoration in some new structure or in the building walls that get built. No one in the heritage community supports commemorations of these types or replicas. They're just a feel-good gesture that seems to be used on a regular basis to fulfill what was once there, an original, a real valuable piece of built heritage. Put up a plaque, fine, but please don't create a new fake old stone wall. Thank you.
Looking for further speakers? Okay, any further speakers on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a motion to close the public participation meeting. Okay, moved and seconded, we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues looking for speakers on this. I could leave the chair and speak. Yeah, let's do that.
Madam Chair and Ward Councillor.
Thank you. So on this particular site, I do think that it needs to be developed. It's been vacant for quite some time. With the current proposal that's before us, I'm just going to switch screens over. When you look at Talbot Street along this corridor, you'll notice that all of the high density buildings are quite narrow to the street. They go right back to the end of their own property lots, and in some instances have some more parking there. To me, that's like the first step of the rhythm of the street going along the northern part there. But when you get to the block where Locust Mount is, across the street is all single family duplexes and those sorts of things. So the contrast between that, I'll call it super density across from that low density at this point, I have great concerns about that level of density. I am supportive of a development that is more in line with what the land is currently zoned at. That type of density, I think, is a good way to go forward. I like the fact that there's a lot of effort that went into the bonusing here to break up the massing. I think that that's quite helpful in terms of, I don't think that it falls right in line with the narrow view on the other side, but I think it is a good compromise to the smaller density to the other side of the road there. Recognizing a lot of work has gone into this and a lot of time has gone into this, both on staff time and the development, the developer's time there, and I have a lot of respect for that. I'm not a huge fan of where the design ended up there, but it's just a drawing at this point. It could look entirely different by the time it's actually built. So I'm going to be voting against this just sheerly based on the density that's been proposed here today.
Thank you. Looking for further speakers. Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Really just a question, and we're circling back to technical questions. I'm interested in learning more about the green space, the OS4 that's being added, and if we can pull that slide up again. So if you can just give us a sense of scale as I'm looking at this. I see a blue line and a red line, and I see some marks in between.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the best kind of distance I have here, so that distance from the red line on the bottom portion to the blue line is roughly 6 meters. Okay.
So this, you know, I see that certainly as a gain. I see that the concerns that were raised by the UTRCA have been addressed. And I also see this as an example of the Great Near Campus Neighborhood Strategy working on a number of levels and over a period of time. We know that units with 4 and 5 bedrooms are not conducive to good living arrangements. Some of us know that by experience 20 years ago or less, sometimes more, and some of us know that because of the work of the Great Near Campus Neighborhood Strategy. We also know that as we increase density and put in apartment buildings, there's a secondary response in a neighborhood, and that is that those single-family homes that in some cases have 5 bedrooms and are right beside families that aren't being used for the purposes they were built become less attractive in the market, and this type of living environment becomes more attractive in the market. I also recognize that the proponent for this site and city staff have worked at length on a number of iterations of this project to get to the point where we are today. And I recognize the proponent commended staff, and I'd like to take the time to commend the proponent as well for taking the time to work through this process, because it can take a great deal of time, it can take a great deal of resources, but when that occurs, something special occurs at Planning Committee, and that is that staff and the proponent come together with an arrangement that they can both agree on. So I know that we can debate the design, and as the chair of the committee pointed out, it's just a picture, and it could look different than what we're looking at. On balance, I see this as an excellent project, and one that I will be supporting based on the staff recommendation, based on the work that's occurred. And we really can't lose sight, in my opinion, of the positive impact developments like this have on the whole Great Near Campus neighborhood, because this type of housing is much, much, much more appropriate than the single-family home conversions that we see in this area and in other areas where we have institutions. So I'll be looking forward to an opportunity to supporting this application here and at council.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins and other speakers?
I just have a few technical questions, if I may, Madam Chair, through you to staff. I guess I'm trying to understand, because I've heard here the bonusing came from the exceptional design of this building. I'm also hearing that this building may not be what it looks like now, but it got the bonusing. So I'm very confused here. And just adding to that, so my first question is, what makes this building exceptional? And now, are we going to have this building? And I'm not sure how this building looks like at the moment. And secondly, the bonusing came from underground parking as well. Correct me if I'm wrong there. There are 133 spaces, 2 underground floors of, and I'm assuming this is going to be geared for student housing. So I just want to kind of figure out what this bonusing means here to this building and how this building came to be.
I'll start out, Madam Chair, and then I'm going to refer the questions relating to design to our Manager of Urban Design, Sean Galloway. Just the question was sort of framed around hearing that what you're seeing is not what it's going to look like, and I don't think anybody on staff said that. The bonus zone actually does include the images at the back, so you'll see them in the appendix. And this is one of those what you see is what you get type of zones, and to provide this kind of height and intensity, that's what we try and do, is give a sense of how it's going to hit the ground. So with that, I will refer back to Mr. Galloway so he can speak to the design of the building and why he and his team felt that this represented excellence in urban design.
If I could, just before Mr. Galloway speaks, I'd like to just clarify my comments. I was speaking in terms of like the colors and all those sorts of things. Like the bonusing is what it is going forward. Yeah.
Thank you, through you, Mrs. Chair. I think there's a couple things that outline the design of the building that give it its bonusing qualities. First, as you'll note, the progression of the design from the first one to the third one, the interface with Talbot Street, we have a 3-story podium element with a step back And we also have the 3-story transition from the neighboring property to the south. So the neighboring property is roughly 2.5 to 3 stories in height, and those lines are being carried across, and then you get a step back, and then you go up in height. Additionally, that step back, as you can see in the photo on the screen, that element at the front along Talbot Street will essentially block out the elements in behind, so you won't be able to see them as you're walking along the street environment against the front building. Brick material across the front, so that base of the building that's 3 stories is all brick material as opposed to stayed concrete. We also have punch-outs. You can see a couple of them. They also happen on the other side of the building. But you can see the punch-outs where you have the angular elements that come out around building or around window sections, and then those are also colored differently to break up the massing of the building, and then additionally other colors are used to break up the massing on all of the walls. And so overall, we've tried to break down the massing using different design details and using different materials. But I think the most important part is this. Originally, the other ones were all 16 stories, either in a shear wall configuration, and we've been able to create that element along Talbot Street that reduces the height, creates the podium features and the step backs, and uses a variety of material types to break down the massing.
And I also had a question about parking underground. Was that part of the bonusing?
Madam Chair, through the official plan, that is one of the bonusing characteristics of a project. So yes, that's something that we do want to see included as part of the bonusing zone.
And if I can ask one other quick question, given that this may become a heritage district, were the historical features not taken into, were any historical features of this design taken into account? I know there's properties further south that do a great job at keeping the heritage in the area, but I'm just kind of curious. We're thinking that this area may become a district, a heritage district, but wondering if you had conversations with the applicant about the heritage features here, if any.
Madam Chair, as part of this application, we did require a heritage impact assessment, and we reviewed that thoroughly. I think I'm understanding the question as to why wouldn't we mimic heritage features on the building, perhaps?
Maybe not so much mimic, but take into account the area and its significance and incorporate it in the design that gave the bonusing with the, was that ever a consideration?
So, Madam Chair, that was done, again, through the assistance of the Heritage Impact Assessment. And that's why you see the 3-story podium front, which is more sensitive to the 3-story buildings around it, and also the use of the brick material. And also then moving the mass of the building towards the north, where there's existing apartment buildings, and ensuring that the southerly heritage significant property immediately to the south of this one is protected and from that massing as well. So all of this design reflects the recommendations of the Heritage Impact Assessment.
And if I may follow up with just, probably it won't be just a comment about the affordability of these units. We're most likely looking at students, but how do we incorporate affordable housing as we develop these buildings?
Well, first, Madam Chair, as we go through these kinds of evaluations of proposals, we aren't looking at who specifically is using them. So we wouldn't be looking at this as student housing necessarily. That might be how it is marketed ultimately, but that's not a planning consideration going forward. The near campus neighborhood strategy does indicate that there's certain requirements. For example, maximum number of bedrooms per unit is something that is a requirement here. And as you've heard already, this application does conform with near campus neighborhood strategy. In terms of affordability, I would say that the majority of the high-density residential developments, the new ones in the City of London, would represent affordable housing, and that's intrinsically affordable housing based on unit size, and I think that this is one that might fall in that category. However, with respect to bonusable affordable housing, that's not something that has been incorporated in this case, so there hasn't been a bonus for affordable housing in this case, and it is something that Council has indicated in both the official plan as well as in some comments recently that they'd like us to be looking for some of those. So we're certainly on the hunt for that.
Looking for further speakers? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an interesting proposal. I am struck by the mass of it. It's fairly significant and does stand in contrast to the neighborhood. I've read through the official plan and tried to kind of make sense of it. In section 3.5.1, it's referred to as the Talbot mixed use area, and then it has very specific policies for Kent, Albert, and Talbot Streets, west of Talbot Street between Milla and Albert Street, Central Avenue, Milheim and John Ann and Talbot Streets. That last section itself speaks to the east side of the street and not the west side of the street. So it seems to be that the way this policy reads is in absence of a very specific street prescription, then the general characteristic applies, which talks about lands designated multifamily high-density residential may be considered for high and medium-density forms of development that involve substantial land assembly and provide a high standard of site and building design with emphasis on landscaped open space and underground or appropriately screened parking areas. So it looks like that's the policy that's being applied here. Is that correct as I read through that, through you, Madam Chair?
That's correct.
Thank you. So, I mean, ultimately, the high density use is appropriate here. The transition, as Ms. Miller had talked about, from Oxford Street towards this site ends up being, it gets shorter, and then suddenly taller, and then suddenly really short in the single family residential next to it, which is the subject of another application and a discussion that's coming up soon, I'd imagine. With our discussions about Camden Terrace, with some other properties along, I guess the Azure building, this one, what ultimately ends up being the kind of the contiguous vision for Talbot Street from Oxford to downtown or vice versa? I mean, ultimately, it seems appropriate to have a scale that's slowly incrementally larger or slowly incrementally smaller. In this case, it seems that we're kind of doing a bit of a roller coaster skyline here. How does that all fit together?
Madam Chair, right now there is no corridor study for that, so we would look to the existing plan of existing official plan designation in the zoning bylaw, and also the future potential heritage conservation district. But right now, it would seem as though the height would go from the downtown, the highest of the downtown, start to lower towards Kent. But given the designation here and the apartments around here, there was and the zoning that's currently permitted, there was some permissions for height here. But in terms of that corridor between Kent and Oxford Street, like I said, there is no corridor study yet, and we'll take our advice from the existing designation and zoning.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, in this circumstance, the prescribed 12 stories seem to have considered that. and now looking for the bonusing and having to create a special policy area, very specific for, to allow something like this, kind of goes counter to what seemed to be envisioned in the policy statements all the way along as it went there. So to go from 12 to 16 is a fairly significant jump, and then the massing comes into play. I do want to address a few of the concerns that were raised. I heard from the gallery specifically with respect to whether this is for students or not. I think we've had a lot of discussion around this horseshoe and onward about the appropriateness of designating who lives where. We can't do that. It's against the law. It's pretty clear. That decision was made. There was reference to a decision that had been made earlier. I think that may have been outside of the policy environment that we exist in now, which is clear that we can't designate whether it's students or seniors or whomever. The building may be purpose-built for specific tenants, but we can't allow or disallow by policy. With respect to the number of bedrooms, when you take a look at most of the apartment stock out there, there are very few apartments that are built with 3 bedrooms. Majority are 1 and 2 bedrooms. So, so this is an interesting proposal to start seeing. It provides the opportunity for families to start considering usage of apartment buildings as an option rather than a house or a townhome. The fact that you could have a 3-bedroom residence and have a bedroom for each of the 2 kids and the parents, that's kind of novel. So I'm supportive of that. I think it's important. I think Councillor Hopkins raises a really good point, and the one that I've asked kind of almost rhetorically now at every one of these is how do we address affordable housing, especially vis-a-vis bonusing, and that's something I'll be looking forward to bringing forward very soon too, for further discussion. The Upper Thames has jurisdiction in the entire watershed. That was a point that was made whether Upper Thames has jurisdiction or not. Upper Thames has jurisdiction everywhere. Any place a drop of water falls, the Upper Thames considers whether there's a watershed issue involved. So in this circumstance, especially since there are OS4 lands at the back of it, that's hazard lands and floodplain consideration. So it's been extended into that, and that's where they derive their authorities. The wall is an interesting point too. Through you, Madam Chair, what, perhaps either to the applicant or to staff, what's involved with the retention of that wall as it remains in situ?
Madam Chair, that image on the screen, actually, the wall that you see there is the neighboring wall, and no wall is proposed for this building. The intent is that that would be, the brick portion of the building would be the interface of the street, and the wall would be removed.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, what would be involved if we were to say, as part of the site plan, we needed that wall retained?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's something we could work with the applicant on, perhaps through the site plan process. However, according to the cultural heritage information, the wall hasn't been deemed to be significant, so it does sort of restrict some of the abilities we have to compel.
Thank you. And I understand there needs to be a road widening. Is that road widening to push towards the building site itself? How would that road widening be accomplished?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the road widening that was required was 13 meters from center line. In this case, it was 2.9 meters across the frontage of Talbot Street on the side of the property. 2.9 meters.
Okay, so for clarification, thank you, Mr. Almahud. So 15 meters from the center line off Talbot Street, so it encroaches towards the property line itself, so there need to be kind of a dip in and out in order to accommodate that left turn lane to lead into the property. So along the frontage of the property, not along the frontage of other properties.
True, but it's 13 meters, not 15 from center line. It's 2.9 across, and it should be fine for the left turn lane, yes, across the property only.
Thank you. One other comment that I heard from the delegations was with respect to traffic. I used to live at 699 Talbot, just a little north of this location. The traffic then, 25 years ago, was immobilized during rush hour, both in the morning and the evening. I'm not sure how much the residential traffic itself contributed to that backlog itself, but putting this number of units there can only be foreseen to have a fairly significant impact on that. Talbot Street along that corridor isn't I guess it ends up being an alternate route to Richmond Street, and ends up being kind of an escape option that people seek when they're trying to go under the train rather than across. Yeah. Unless you're a truck. Do we have a sense of the vision for what Talbot Street becomes? I mean, as we continue to recognize that we're putting density along here, this is a candidate site for densification. How does Talbot Street play in its future for traffic and traffic management, especially with respect to that underpass, which doesn't seem to have much modification capacity?
Through you, Madam Chair. So Talbot Street is classified as a primary collector street as for now. It's still under capacity for a primary collector, because a primary collector would hold about 15,000 daily traffic volume. This one is about 11 to 13,000. Now we are in the process of updating the transportation model for the city, and based on what the transportation update for the roadway network in London, plus the rapid transit, of course, we will know more we'll have more information how we can move forward if there is any update to the road or anything. But for now, there hasn't been anything for Talbot Street. Even in the transportation master plan, there wasn't anything that talked about any widening or any transportation improvement to this road.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I'm now having fun because I don't spend nearly enough time on Civic Works to have a good sense of the roadway classification system. I have some sense, but primary collector, how many lanes would it typically have? Would other primary collectors have?
Normally 2 lanes, but still it can be widened to 4 lanes if required.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I guess kind of in summary, my comments on this, I'm on the fence. I would like through site plan to see what opportunity there would be for retention of the wall asset. I'm on the fence of saying that I'd prefer to see that height and density more consistent with the 12 stories as prescribed in the official plan. And I kind of get wary about creating special policy areas for specific sites. I think they become one-offs and become fairly significant deviations from well-considered planning and create a few complications to how these kind of buildings interface with their neighboring uses. So I'm not sure. I think we're kind of at the end of debate, so I'm not sure where I'm going to land on this, but I'd be interested to hear what colleagues are landing.
So on the list I've got Councillors Cassidy and then Helmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I have a question for staff through you. Under the current zoning, there's 10 stories allowed, and also 250 units per hectare. Roughly how many, if we were dealing with these same 3-bedroom units, how many units would that translate into?
Through you, Madam Chair, I did the math assuming that would be a question. So based on that new lot area, I get roughly 145 units would be permitted, and they're proposing 236.
And so if they went 10 stories with 145 units, would they be required to come before us for a zoning bylaw amendment? They would just go straight to site plan and start building? Yes? Okay. Would they be required to have underground parking, or would they be required to expand that OS4 zone as we're doing, or as is being proposed?
Madam Chair, with regard to the underground parking, there would be no obligation for that. However, the OS4 is based on ecological functions, and so just to push that out, it wouldn't just be a simple amendment to that without demonstrating the ecological functions and the protection of it.
So the ecological functions require them to expand the OS4 zone, is that correct?
That's correct. As part of this application, these things were reviewed and also has to do with obtaining some of that stable slope for the city's benefit.
So my final question is the step back portion, the three-story podium portion. Would our site plan people be able to compel them to do that sort of thing, or could they have a big mass of building 10 full stories right up to Talbot?
Well, Madam Chair, it's certainly through the site plan process, there is an opportunity to speak to design, and with the London plan coming into effect, there's more guidance and more policy basis for our colleagues in development services to have that discussion through the site plan process. But in terms of what you see in front of you and building materials and some of those other things that Mr. Galloway pointed out, it's uncertain but unlikely that we would be able to get that far just through a site plan process, and that's why discussions relating to bonusing have taken place here.
Thank you. So that's what I thought. So my point in asking all of those questions for my colleagues is this. With bonusing, we have some certainty of what will be built on this site. And as Councillor Park, as you rightly pointed out, the work that's gone into this with the applicant and the staff it can't be, I can't say enough about that. It's really important that they've come to this place together for what seems to be, I think, the best solution for some of the problems that have been identified at this particular site. The design and aesthetics are very subjective. I like that 3-story podium piece, and I think that, at least in the renderings, the color of the brick that's been chosen is complementary to other homes on the southern part of Talbot Street. And I think it really does bring the building down to size. I know as a personal anecdote, I was walking somewhere downtown recently around near City Hall, and I remember saying to myself, wow, I didn't realize that building was actually that high. And it was a high rise in this general area, but had that same sort of 3 or 4-story podium thing. And when you're on the street and that's what's in front of you, your eye is fooled and you feel like it's a smaller building. And it's only when you step back and look up that you notice how really big that building is. I also think that there's a nice juxtaposition of an older looking, more stately design with that 3-story podium to match the stately homes in the area. And then further back, the more modern architectural design. I think that's a good, sort of speaks to the whole general area where we have that mix of old and modern, and even the mid-century buildings further north on Talbot. So I just want to caution my colleagues from turning something down when we have some certainties in there. So we will have underground parking with this design. If we stuck with the zone as is with the 10 stories, there's a possibility that the applicant could choose to cut costs because underground parking is quite expensive. They could choose surface parking, and we just had a big discussion and debate of wanting to limit surface parking in the downtown area, and this is close enough to downtown that it makes sense to limit surface parking in this area as well. And surface parking is an inefficient use of land, as Councillor Helmer has said many, many times. When it comes to the wall, if you look at the current streetscape, and you see that site is quite high. The plot of land actually is at the top of the wall. And so it seems to me as you know, somebody who's not in construction, it seems to me a difficult prospect to save that wall and retain that wall when the renderings that we see show the building come down to the sidewalk level, which makes more sense as well to make it more pedestrian friendly and more in tune with the sidewalk and the pedestrian realm. And as far as the traffic goes, I drive on Talbot as well to whenever I see those flashing lights for the train, that Talbot is my alternate route. And so I'm an example that I believe the majority of people causing the congestion on Talbot Street are not people that actually live on Talbot Street. So in my personal opinion, I don't believe adding a lot of extra density on this site is necessarily going to increase the traffic. We want these sites to be developed for people to live downtown and closer to downtown, where they're close to transit. There's you know, it's not far to get down into the Blackfriars area and get onto the bike path in that area. So there's cycling. There's a lot of opportunities for walking. And if somebody lives here, whether they're a student or not, they can walk downtown. If it's a Fanshawe student, they can walk downtown and go to the campuses, the new campuses downtown for Fanshawe. And if they're working downtown, again, they can walk there from here. So I think it provides a lot of opportunities for different modes of transportation. And it's not just about a car. So having said all that, I think the bonusing gives us a lot of certainty, gives us certainty in design, gives us certainty in underground parking, gives us a lot of the perks and extra things that we want to see go into this. So I will support the staff recommendation, and I would move it when the time comes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, I got a couple of questions for our staff. So I'm just looking at the site plan sort of concept. It's on page 220 of the added agenda. And if I'm looking at the northern part of that site plan, this is sort of what I would describe as the main access, I guess. Yeah, the northern one. Yeah. So could you point out on there where the entrance to the underground parking is?
Through you, Madam Chair, if you can see the parking spaces kind of on the north side at the rear of the property, so I guess to our west, the entrance is just to the right of those parking spaces to the underground parking.
So there's two sort of things jumping out of the building. That's the entrance to the underground parking? Yeah, okay, great. So how close, I can't really tell because it's so closely cropped, how close is the intersection of the street that is immediately to the east? It looks like the entrance and exit from the building is like almost directly aligned with that street, but not quite. And I'm just wondering if I'm reading that correctly.
Madam Chair, Mr. Corby's just pulling up a tool to measure the distance.
Okay, colleagues, just while they're pulling that up, the reason I'm asking is that that's Mill Street, that's sort of to the east of the exit. And there's a left turn proposed coming out of the building, sort of right into the intersection of Mill Street. And I'm not so sure that's a great idea, and I wanted to ask our transportation staff about that. I just wanted to make sure that that curve I saw on the sidewalk was actually the intersection of Mill Street.
So through you, Madam Chair, so we asked for the left turn lane, the northbound, to the second axis, which is just south of Mill Street. Now, we couldn't ask for a left turn lane to the other axis because this site has two axes. I believe the north axis is the one that will be mainly used, that goes to the underground parking. There is no conflict in turning movements between the northbound left turn lane into the axis and the southbound to Mill Street. While if you look at the second axis to the south, it does have a conflict with John Street. If we provided a left turn lane just because of the southbound and northbound on Talbot Street. So I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
I think we're getting there. So my concern, just to be more specific, is turning movements out of the apartment building headed north on Talbot, turning left. So right now it looks like you can come up and turn left out of the apartment building and try and head north. You'll be turning right into the intersection of Talbot and Mill, where there will be people trying to make left turn lanes, plus you have all the north and southbound traffic. It doesn't seem like a turning movement that would work very well.
It's not necessarily perfect, but I think people exiting the site, it's like any other movement. They will have to stop and make sure that traffic is clear before moving and going to Talbot Street. But it's definitely not perfect.
Okay, that's helpful. Another question in terms of how far back the apartment building is from the existing sidewalk. So what's being suggested here is that there's apartment building face, trees, sidewalk, roadway. We're talking about the roadway being widened a little bit to accommodate a left-hand turn lane. And I wonder, from the existing roadway or sidewalk that's there right now, how far back is that building?
So, Madam Chair, to the, from the front of the building to the lot line appears to be 5.5 meters. And the sidewalk, probably another meter.
Okay, that's very helpful. When we're talking about the retention of the heritage of the wall, the old wall, I hope the applicant will forgive me, but I actually went to the site earlier today and I wandered around. There's a bunch of no trespassing signs, but I kind of ignored them. You know, one thing I can tell you is that the wall is right up against the sidewalk, right? And it's, you know, this tall. And the land is, you know, even with that basically going back, and then it kind of dips and dives until it gets to the big slope. So it seems like this entire site plan would not work if you were to retain that wall. It would block the exit at the entrance. The secondary entrance is currently, there's a wall there. And so I think that it's not practical if this is the kind of building orientation and design that we're trying to achieve. I have another question around how deep the whole thing is from the front of the building to the very back of the building, how far that is. It looks like it's maybe like 80 meters or something. It's not a huge area.
Through you, Madam Chair, while that information is being looked at, I just want to provide a bit of a clarification. Unfortunately, misspoke earlier about the heritage wall. We've had a chance to look at the information a bit more. The wall would actually be within the road allowance that'd be taken for the city right away, as you mentioned. So if the wall were to be retained, it would fall into city ownership without a budget that we have to maintain the wall as well.
Okay, maybe I'll just get another question going for different people. So, we've the whole parcel is quite large. A lot of it is already in OS4, and then there's this additional part that's being added to the OS4. Can someone give me the area of that part that's being added to OS4? I know it's in a regular shape. It's kind of hard to measure it, but it seems like it's fairly significant in terms of the overall context of the parcel.
Again, Madam Chair, this isn't something that we were prepared for in advance. Might be able to get a tool online here to measure it.
The applicant has the answer. Please, come on up. To the microphone, please. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, that OS4 area is 4,725 square meters. So.
Councillor Helmer?
Okay, that is helpful because I had the previous amount and then the additional amount, so I can kind of get a sense of how much has been added. So a couple of comments about the actual zoning. So I support the zoning that's being proposed. I had some concerns around, you know, the underground parking and what its effects would be on the ecological function of the area to the west, but the fact that Upper Thames is satisfied, having expressed a fair number of concerns earlier on with other parts of design, I think that's addressed some of my concerns in that regard. I think having the 3-story with the 7-story step back is really, really important and probably the best thing to come out of the various iterations of the design. I think that's going to be, in the long term, really good for the streetscape along Talbot. Putting the trees and creating that buffer, I think also will be very helpful in the long run. I know that that's where the wall is now, and I think having looked at the wall, if it was possible to keep it, I could see keeping it, but I'm not sure that this kind of design is going to work with that. And I don't think the wall is so important that we need to design around it that way. I also think that this is using a very efficient use of land, right? So the fact that there's underground parking here and it's being squeezed into a relatively small area, and all that area that is to the west is being retained as open space. I think that we're not trying to encroach into the floodplain. We're not getting too close to the slope. I think this is very appropriate in terms of where it's being located on the site, and it's making really good use of that land. There's very little surface parking for a building that's holding a lot of people. And I think that's what we need to see of more and more of that in downtown. And I think that's going to be really helpful. I think that left turn access, we'll see what happens at site plan, you know, coming out of the building. A lot of places we would put a right in, right out there, and I'm not sure that the left turn is going to work. At the very least, it's not going to block too many people. At least they have their own lane to sit in when they're trying to make that turn. And I guess they'll kind of adapt to it. But those are my comments for now for my colleagues. I think it's a pretty reasonable approach. I mean, I don't try to judge the architectural design of buildings. Some of them I think are great and some of them I think are not so great. I think in terms of the urban design, you know, like how is it going to relate to the street? What's it going to look like from the street, from the human scale? There's a lot of improvements there compared to the blocks that we're seeing before.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Hopkins?
Yes. Boy, this is a difficult one for me, but I'm still not convinced that this building fits into this community and how it fits into this community. I appreciate the work that the developer has done, and I would sort of say that it's high density. It's high, and the density in this area is something that I'm not sure how that is going to fit into the community. I've got concerns there. I had concerns about the environmental aspect to it, and appreciate Upper Thames coming forward with saying that they're satisfied, but the heritage component on this site, I think, is a concern for me. The loss, the value, regardless of, you know, the wall, as much as I would like to see that wall retained, I think there could be more features to this building when it comes from a heritage perspective. I really am just not convinced that this building fits and benefits the community because of the density. I would say one thing, though, when it comes to 3-bedroom apartments, there are apartment buildings out that have a number of 3-bedroom apartments. I don't think this building is unique in any way, and maybe that's part of the problem, is that we're allowing for this greater density in the uniqueness of the building, to me, is, it's too dense. So I won't be supporting this application and encourage the developer to work with the city to get a smaller building that fits.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers? Mayor Brown?
Thanks, Chair. It looks very much like this is going to be a split decision at committee, and sometimes that's helpful because it gives us a week to reflect on our decision, and it gives council a heads up that there's going to be, a contentious decision that will be debated probably again in full at council. I think there's a very good debate here. I think as we prepare for the next week and as we prepare for council, we really have to ask ourselves about the Great Near Campus Neighborhood Strategy and about all of the work that's gone into that document, and that about how it aligns perfectly with that document, that policy, that direction that's been developed over the course of many years with consultation with many stakeholders. I think we really have to consider our own council directive for 45% infill, which is a massive goal. And it's going to require intensification. It's going to require developments like this. And then I think we also have to consider what could be built there tomorrow. And so, on balance, I look at this as a very positive development for our community, for a lot of very good reasons that we've identified in policy and direction in the past. And I also look at it as a situation where staff and the proponent have worked very closely together over a very extended period of time. And they've done their very best to bring something forward. I'm sure there were compromises made. I'm sure there were agreements struck. And this is the best option. And so as we prepare for council, if it does tie tonight, I'd encourage us to think about, the commitments that we've made vis-a-vis the London Plan, vis-a-vis Great Near Campus Neighborhood Strategies, and also that very significant target that we've set for infill.
Order. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't going to speak again, but the mayor brought up a couple of points that I do have to counter a little bit. I think the Great Near Campus Neighborhood Strategy is one part. The official plan is another part, one of which a significant amount of neighborhood consultation has gone into. We can't look at a document in isolation. I think it's really important that we look at the material, the assembly of our documents and consider them. I'm leaning towards voting in favor of the building, but I have to emphasize that we can't keep deviating from our policy framework. I think our policy framework is quite appropriate. We can accomplish 45% intensification without having to throw out the official plan principles that exist there. We've created sites that say this is where 12 stories goes, this is where 16 stories can go, where bonusing is appropriate and where it isn't. This one's on the edge for me, and for me to vote in favor of it, I'm really not entirely convinced. However, that all said, when we look at it, all of our planning has been very well considered. We just went through the largest review of the official plan in 2 decades, and reaffirmed the ones that the policies that we thought were appropriate, and changed the ones that we thought needed modernizing. And here we are a year later, saying, we can make those decisions on the fly. And the whole purpose of creating those planning documents was so that we don't get stuck in trying to figure out whether this fits or not, because we've already contemplated those things. And we did that with a very large 10,000, 13,000 person discussion for the London Plan. And on a neighborhood-specific basis on these area plans themselves. So I want to urge caution here, and urge caution as we take a look at this and future applications and current applications to say, let's understand what went into making those documents and how we came to those recommendations and how we created those guidelines. Because bigger isn't always better. We want to build inward, upward. I totally subscribe to that, but that doesn't mean that every site needs to be as tall as it possibly can be. There is middle ground on this.
Thank you. And just before any other speakers, I'm going to give the microphone over to the clerk so she can talk about the petition that was just spoken about, so that that clarification's out there for the public.
Through you, Madam Chair, the reason that the petition was not included with the agenda is for privacy purposes. We do not have consent from each individual that signed the petition that they give us consent to disclose their personal information. I can assure you, however, that members of council were provided with copies of the petition. They're aware of it. And it was also noted as well on the agenda today. So the council is very aware of the petition.
So were there any further speakers at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we'll call the question. When it's moved and seconded, of course.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-2.
Thank you, colleagues. And no items for direction, deferred matters, additional business. Seeing none, we can take a motion for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Mayor Brown. All in favor? Thank you. We're adjourned.